I had to pay dearly to go where many people don't even know it exists. An 8-day trip, in the dark, in the cold, in the absolute silence of a place that seems to exist before time. And that was not made for us. It wasn't luxury tourism, nor was it glory to talk about at parties. It was instinct. Something inside me needed to see what lies beneath the earth. Not in a documentary, not in a book, but with your own eyes. The name is Krubera. Officially, the deepest cave ever recorded on the planet. But that's what they set up here, on the surface. Because down there are no more measurements. There are no more maps. What I found goes far beyond geological depth. It's a raw truth that only reveals itself when you cross the impossible and pay the price. To enter, I needed scientific approval. I signed documents that assumed my death was probable. And above all, I needed money. A lot of money. Because this type of access is not sold in agencies. It only happens when you have the right reason and enough courage to transform wealth into real sacrifice. Krubera does not forgive. She doesn't welcome you. She swallows you slowly. Every meter descended steals a piece of your identity. Time disappears. Hunger becomes background noise. The body bends. The mind begins to collapse. And the further you go down, the harder it is to remember who you were when you entered. This is the story of my descent there. And maybe the reason I've never been able to forget since I came back. If you stay with me until the end, you will understand everything. Most people spend a fortune to escape fear. I spent it to face him. I had already paid for experiences on private islands, flown on exclusive jets, dived in forbidden waters, but nothing came close to what this invitation promised. There was no glamour, no spotlight, just a coordinate, a warning, and the clear feeling that whoever accepted wouldn't come back the same. The email arrived without a sender, encrypted, with files in Russian and a low-resolution map. Krubera, said the title. But what he offered me was not just geography. It was access. Access to the kind of place that doesn't forgive, that doesn't care about your money, your fame, or your fitness. Krubera tests what you have inside. And he doesn't accept excuses. Signing the liability waiver was like accepting one's own disappearance. In case of an accident, no one would respond. In case of death, they might not even find my body. But I accepted. Not because of the risk, for the reason. Because only those who have a reason greater than fear are able to cross this type of darkness. And inside, I discovered that reason can't be invented. It comes from within, or it doesn't come. If you also feel that some truths are only revealed when you risk everything, subscribe to the channel now. Because this story is just beginning. And what comes next is the kind of experience that no millionaire buys. Only those who are willing to lose what's comfortable to find what's real. The first feeling was that I was being swallowed, as if that place were not just a geological space, but a living organism, ancient, hungry, untouched. The rock had a smell. The air felt used, as if it had been breathed by thousands before us, and still carried traces of their presence. The cold was not the absence of heat. It was the presence of something that was examining us. Every step was an intruder, each sound an intrusion. And the further we advanced, the more the notion of going back ceased to exist. Our group was trained, but the silence between us said more than any survival manual. No one knew what awaited us other than the next subway. There were parts of the path that weren't even on the most recent maps. We had wet, slippery ropes, hooks that came loose easily, and descents where our feet couldn't find support for minutes. And all of this hundreds of meters deep, without any contact with the outside world. In one of the sections, The walls narrowed so much that we had to let go of our equipment, drag ourselves on our elbows and hold our breath. One of us was stuck for almost a minute, unable to move his hip. The sound of his rapid breathing echoed as if it were the cave. Everyone stopped, until he let go. But at that moment something changed. It was as if Krubera had tested us, and now we are accepted. The tent we set up that night was more of a ritual than a shelter. The floor was hard, uneven, wet. The ceiling was constantly dripping with water. No walls protected us from the internal wind. The constant dripping of the cave beat like clockwork in the skull, and our bodies, exhausted, just trembled. But sleep didn't come. The eyes burned. My mind flashed images of what could happen if a flood started, if a stone came loose, if a rope broke. Up there, no one would know. And it was then that I understood. We hadn't really started to descend yet. That was just the threshold. The real entrance was in what would come later, in the vertical shafts, in the submerged tunnels, in the silences that would not allow screams. We were entering absolute darkness. And what existed there was not just the absence of light. It was the absence of hope, of logic, of any known reference. In the days that followed, the air became thinner, the temperature lower, the muscles slower. The backpacks began to weigh like anchors. Rest shifts were exchanged for waking shifts. One of the guides started writing, sentences in his notebook that no one understood. "Time is curved here," he wrote. "Memory flows like water." Another spent almost an hour looking at a stalactite, as if waiting for it to speak. We begin to measure time by the noises of our own body, the stomach growling, the bones creaking, the sighs that escaped in the dark. Everything there was alive, but nothing there was human. It was as if we were being reprogrammed, part by part, to survive something that made no sense in our biology. Brutal adaptation, instinctive. At one point, I moved a few meters away from the group to urinate. I carelessly turned off the flashlight and was left completely blind. 5 seconds, 10, 30. I lost the direction of the sound, from the floor, from me. Silence enveloped me like liquid, and I swear I felt like I heard a voice. It was no ordinary voice, it was like a thought from someone who wasn't me. I lowered my head. I breathed slowly, and I understood. I had crossed the point of no return. There, in that fraction of darkness, I realized that nothing that made me who I was had value in there. My name, my history, my wealth, my past. All of this had been trapped in the last meter of the surface. From then on, there was only what I was able to bear. And Krubera, silent, cold, immense, began to write her truth on my body. On the third day, the body stopped responding as before. The muscles no longer had strength, but habit. Every movement was an act of stubbornness. Hunger was no longer a nuisance, it was a permanent state. And thirst, controlled with droppers, with liquid filtered from puddles or melted from cold stones. The water tasted metallic, and the metal, in that darkness, seemed to be part of us. One of the guides fell without warning. His body was collected by 2 colleagues in absolute silence, as if the sound could wake something in the stone. He was shaking but didn't speak. He looked at the ceiling of the cave as if he saw something that others did not. See? He slept for hours. When he woke up, he didn't remember his name. It just said, "I've gone too far down. There's no going back." Another started talking to someone who didn't exist. He murmured entire sentences, gestured, and suddenly he stopped and smiled, as if he was at peace with something that no one else understood. One of the logbooks appeared torn, with crossed-out pages. Circular, repetitive designs. When we asked, he just said, She asked to delete it. Nobody asked who she was. I started to see figures. Not like shadows cast by the flashlight. They were denser. A presence. At a narrow bend, where the ceiling was so low we had to crawl, I saw my mother sitting. She was wearing the same dress as my father's funeral. He looked at me and said, "Come back. Enough is enough." I froze. I lacked air. I was paralyzed for seconds. When I started breathing again, all that was left was darkness. But how to return? I no longer knew where the beginning was. I only knew how to follow. The worst came later. The siphon. An underwater tunnel where the only air that exists is that of your mask. And the only possible direction is a taut thread attached to the rock wall. There, nothing happens. It crawls into the water. The movement is slow. The hands touch the stone and the thread. And the brain repeats, "Don't let go, don't stop, don't think, just go." The cold of the water was a shock. The weight of the equipment seemed to double. And the sound was inside your head, your heart, your breath, your fear. And time stretches. You don't know if it was seconds or minutes. He knows he is there, trapped between the rock and the water, and that the end could come through drowning, through panic, through carelessness. At one point I hit my head. The light went out. I felt desperation, wanting to enter. I locked my muscles. I held the thread so tightly that I lost feeling in my fingertips. But I continued. When I came out the other side, shaking, blind with fear, I vomited water and air. I sat on the rock and just cried. Inside the mask, in silence. The taste of salt mixed with the metal of my breath was still with me. It wasn't crying out of weakness. It was mourning for everything I had left behind. For the version of me that didn't survive the crossing. Our next camp was set up in a place that looked like a canyon of the earth. The echo there was longer, deeper, as if the sounds took a while to accept that they were free. Some of us even began to whisper when we spoke, not out of fear, but out of respect, as if we knew we were inside something we heard. And I felt it. There was a legend among the oldest scientists. Krubera changes people, that whoever goes down to certain levels comes back with a different outlook, an emptiness, as if he had seen what should not be seen. I began to observe the faces of my colleagues, and they were changing, silent, less expressive, as if parts of the soul had been left behind. And then I asked, "Would you have the courage to cross an underwater, narrow, icy and dark tunnel, with no guarantee of coming out on the other side? Could you overcome the panic and trust just a thread attached to the rock? Leave it in the comments. Because the next part of the descent doesn't just involve the body. It involves memory, emptiness, and what we have always tried to forget." The fourth camp looked like it had been excavated by something that didn't want to be found. A narrow corridor, where the ceiling, scraped shoulders, and the floor was uneven like a fossilized battlefield. Dampness permeated everything. Clothes, thoughts, decisions. The air was thicker. Each breath required effort. And even without light, it was possible to feel the weight of the dark pressing down on your head. One of the explorers, while trying to rest, woke up with a fit. He screamed for minutes. He said he was buried alive, that he had dirt in his mouth, that he couldn't move. The sound of screams hit the walls as if it echoed inside our skin. "We need to hold it tight," he cried. I asked to go up. Another, with sunken eyes and gray skin, vomited blood when he woke up. The pressure had reached his stomach, which was already empty. There was no more energy to control one's own organs. I walked away and sat down by a small puddle. The water vibrated slightly with each distant step, as if breathing along with the cave. I looked at my reflection. and he didn't recognize me anymore. He was not the man with expensive trips, exclusive dinners, or expansion plans. It was someone naked inside. And then the questions began. Why did I need this? What was I trying to prove? Was it about saying I was there? Show that money took me where no one else has gone? Or was it just another escape? The most expensive, the most dangerous, from the world that called me a winner when I hadn't seen myself that way in a long time. There, deep in the planet, surrounded by rock, silence and heavy breathing, I saw myself like never before, and it was scary. Because the hardest truth to face is the one that comes when no one is watching, when there is no more camera, status, or image, just you, and what's left. The hours didn't pass there. They stretched like a punishment. The food didn't go down anymore. The hands were shaking. The flashlight I carried felt heavier than the first day. One of the team members who had barely spoken since the beginning of the journey came to me, sat next to me and simply said, "We dig from the outside, thinking we are exploring the earth, but deep down, it is within us that the holes open up." He smiled, and he went back to his corner. I tried to sleep, but the noise from the cave, that constant drip like an old clock ticking, wouldn't let it happen. Every drop was a memory. Each sound, an unresolved thought, and I began to understand. Krubera doesn't hold you back with a stone. It captures you with memory, with what you tried to bury up there. And that, down there, comes back to find you. I started writing on a damp piece of paper that I kept in my pocket. Loose words, forgotten guilt, people I left behind, decisions that made me rich, but that cost more than they seemed, and a line crossed my mind. Maybe the only way to find what is true is to lose everything that is not. There was no future, not past. Just a gift carved in the dark where you either transform or go crazy. There was no turning back. But there was no longer any mask. Everything that was left was raw, real, undressed in pose. If you've come this far with me, answer me honestly. Could you come face to face with everything you tried to forget? Would you have the courage to dig inside yourself without a map, without a flashlight, without a guarantee of finding a way out? If this touched you in any way, leave a like. It's the way I know that this story found an echo there. The sixth day dawned without sunrise. The darkness was permanent, the cold constant, the bodies spent, and hope an almost extinct noise. Nobody said much. Communication was limited to gestures, quick glances, almost robotic waves. The cave seemed larger with each step, as if expanding as the mind shrank. Each open tunnel seemed to lead us to a place that was no longer part of the planet we knew. And then it happened. On the bank of a narrow siphon, where the water pulsed with a silent, unmeasurable rhythm, we saw movement, a subtle, almost imperceptible ripple. Someone pointed out. Another approached, and then we all, as if hypnotized, came closer, eyes wide, barely breathing. They were small, translucent beings who swam as if they were floating in time itself. They didn't have eyes, they had no color, but they had something that stopped us inside, presence. They were alive, blind, silent. And they were there before any of us, alive in total absence of light, heat, stimulation, or meaning. We captured one, gently. He didn't react. He didn't struggle. I didn't know we were there. Or maybe you knew. And it just didn't matter. It broke me, in a way that none of the hallucinations, falls, or suffocations had done. Because it was at that moment that I understood something simple and brutal. The world goes on. Even without us, even without our presence, our buildings, our ambitions. Those beings lived in a different time, in a space where the word importance does not exist. And yet they were there, adapted, complete, in balance. It went through me with more force than the Abkhazia siphon, because everything I had built up here, the image, the titles, the accessions, the speeches, suddenly seemed like noise. Noise produced to distract us from the most obvious truth, that real life doesn't need us. It's us who need it. I looked at that tiny being and understood. It evolved without needing to be seen, without needing a stage, clicks, validation. And perhaps this is the purest form of existence. So pure that when confronted with it, we break inside. Because our world is made of reflections, and that didn't reflect anything. It just existed. Some team members tried to register. The cameras were shaking, the light blurred, and it seemed that the environment rejected being documented. As if to say, what is true cannot be recorded, if you live and respect yourself. We stayed there for over an hour, in silence, observing, studying, absorbing. Time seemed to pause, as if we had been invited, not to understand, but to feel. Later, back at camp, someone asked, "Do they know about us?" And the question echoed. Do those beings know that the world up here builds skyscrapers, cryptocurrencies, and rockets? Do they know we discuss fame, likes, and control? Or do they know precisely that all this doesn't matter? It was at that point that I understood something that might change my entire life. Perhaps the greatest wealth is not in discovering something new, but realizing that you were never the center. That you can pay millions, travel to the center of the earth, endure extreme conditions, and yet all you will find is a silence that gracefully ignores you. A silence that doesn't need you. And maybe that's why. It's the only really honest thing. There, in front of that blind and transparent creature, I saw more than ever, and I saw myself smaller. But not as a defeat, like relief, because not everything needs our presence to have value. Not every life needs to be visible to be incredible. And perhaps the true meaning of being human is to recognize with humility that no matter how deep we go, there will always be something that is beyond our understanding. The descent to this point was costly, but what I learned from that being, who doesn't even know what money, time, or name is, was worth every penny. Last night there were no stars, not even a watch, not even sleep. The body no longer obeyed. Every muscle seemed to protest the very idea of continuing. And yet there we were, silent, packing soggy gear, attaching ropes to anchor points, checking carabiners with hands that shook constantly. The climb began before anything dawned, and each of us knew it wasn't just a climb. It was the return of the underground of consciousness, and he would charge a lot. My fingers tingled. The backpack seemed to have doubled in weight. The boots slipped on the wet stone, but there was no other option. The cable pulled me up slowly, as if the cave itself was resisting letting me go. At one point, my hand failed. The knot didn't hold as it should. My coat got tangled. I stopped. I was left hanging, between the ground that was no longer ground, and the sky that was still too far away. It was rock above, darkness all around, and the emptiness below. I breathed heavily, trying to ignore the fact that if I slipped another inch, there would be no coming back. My feet hit the air as if searching for something that wasn't there, and it was there, in that moment between the fall and the decision, that I found what I came for. The truth. Raw, simple, violent. She wasn't at the bottom of the cave. It was not in the invisible beings, not even in the ancient silence of the rocks. The truth came when fear overcame pride, when the risk surpassed the ego, when life hung by a thread, and still, I decided to fight. It is at this moment that everything reveals itself, when you realize that the money that got you there bought you access, bought equipment, guides, permits. But it didn't make sense, didn't buy transformation, because the true price is not counted in figures. It is told in fragments of your soul. And at that exact point, where the fingers almost let go of the string, where the scream chokes and sweat runs down the eyes, you understand. No one comes back the same. Because to come back, you have to leave a part of yourself down there, a piece that will not return. And it shouldn't. Because it is precisely this piece that prevented you from feeling what you feel now. After a few minutes, I was able to unlock the jacket, reattach the rope, and continue. But the mind stayed there, anchored in an invisible point where fear becomes wisdom and humility replaces arrogance, where wealth stops being a label and becomes an achievement of silence. Upon emerging from the cave, my eyes hurt from the daylight. The skin burned. The wind felt strange, as if the world outside had turned into another planet. I took a deep breath. For the first time in days, I breathed weightlessly. And I cried. Not out of sadness, but because I finally understood what I came for. It wasn't an accomplishment. It wasn't a story. It was a clean cut between the man who went down and the man who went up. Today, back on the surface, I understand that true transformation never comes from outside. It is born at the exact moment you almost lose everything. And yet it continues. The name of the channel is not just a provocation. It is a reminder. Millionaire for a reason. And the reason is not in the money. It's in what you do with it. Because there are doors that only open with wealth, yes. But crossing them and coming out on the other side requires something that money can never buy. The courage to give your soul to the unknown and return with a new one. If you've watched this far, perhaps you also feel what I felt down there. That there are experiences that are not bought to show off, but to understand. That some doors require more than courage. They ask for sacrifice. And that true wealth is not in assets, in titles, in exclusive access. It appears when you choose to lose control, to play something that no one else has seen. Something that transforms without needing to explain. That was the journey to Krubera. A paywall with money, yes, but lived with soul. Because there, at the deepest point a man can enter and still return, I found neither fame nor glory. I found silence, pain, and the answer that perhaps everyone is looking for. But few have the courage to seek, and that's why this channel exists. Millionaire for a reason. It's not about how much you have. It's about what you do with it. What kind of truth do you buy when you decide to pay the real price? This was just one of the doors. In the next episode, we go to a place where the rarest dish on the planet costs 20,000 Rs and can leave you speechless for a whole week. It's not a metaphor. It's science, mystery, and risk. Leave your like now if something here crossed your mind. Comment what impressed you most on this trip and sign up, because the next trip isn't for everyone. Here, wealth is never the end. It's just the price to start.